Okay. All right, everybody. This is Cory Stevens. Cory's a world-renowned queen breeder in Missouri, and he's going to talk about queen breeding. So, take it away, Cory.
All right. Towards the end, if we have any questions or anything, you might have to field the questions. If it's like a voice in the back of the room, I can't hear it real well. So,
Yep, no problem.
all right. All right. I'll just minimize that. Okay. This is just kind of walking through where I've come from and where I'm heading. Check out that noob with the white suit there. Well, how I got started, my dad and my brother had bought several beehives, I think, as a money-making scheme. And, it turns out there's a little more work involved, and maybe they didn't love it as much as they thought they would. So I ended up with most of their colonies. I opened up their colony for the first time, and I don't know, it was like most of you know, it was like looking inside another little universe there. It was pretty cool. And whenever I looked in Dad's colony, one of the first times I got in it, there was swarm cells hanging underneath the frames. And I told Dad, I'm like, you better do something with that bee colony. It's about to swarm. Dad's like, oh, okay, okay, I'll do something with it. And like, it was probably 120 yards from the house, maybe more. And the colony swarmed and actually swarmed into the side of his house. So it was kind of crazy. I think they're still there to this day. It may not be the exact same colony, but I think they're still in that wall. So addiction took hold quickly. Bees should have a disclaimer and a warning that they could be addictive to certain people. Soon I was shelling out money to get more beehives. This is the queen bee here. This was back when we lived up towards St. Louis. That's where we had our colonies. These two.
Where are you
Uh,
located right now?
what's that?
Where are you located right now?
I'm in southeast Missouri. If you know where Cape Girardeau is, we're about 45 minutes southwest of Cape Girardeau. We're west of Bloomfield, Missouri. That's the closest town to us. So the one here on the left, that's my oldest. We just got out of the deer stand a little bit before dark here. She's in tech school and has graduated, and the one on the right is a senior in high school. So they've been through a lot of the beekeeping adventure. This was back whenever I bought, I think, 10 nucleus colonies one year and had all new cypress woodenware. So I was pretty proud of that. So about my third year of beekeeping, um, we had a lot of issues. I would see chalk brood, parasitic mite syndrome. Mites were definitely an issue. The colonies just weren't real vigorous. They were from queens that we had ordered. I don't know exactly where they came from, but it was just a general commercial source. And so that kind of got me thinking about getting some stock that wasn't quite so susceptible. And also, that's whenever I started getting obsessed with host resistance, or basically bees that have some resistance to where they don't just get taken out by any disease or mite quite so easily. So before I did that, most of the queens, like I said, had been purchased, and it seemed like they were expensive. They never had them exactly whenever I needed them, and so I started thinking about raising my own queens. This is whenever I purchased some Tom Glenn VSH and some of the USDA Paul line breeder queens. This was back whenever they were ridiculously cheap, like $100. So I didn't know how to raise queens yet, but I bought a breeder queen. And then luckily, I didn't waste my money. I figured out pretty quickly how to raise some pretty good queens. So this was way back in the day, whenever iPhones weren't so cool and so good. But you can tell those are some pretty nice queen cells. Now I've got a little bit better iPhone. I get a little bit better pictures now. So these are just some queens I'd raised a couple years ago. I don't know if Natalie has spoke down in your area or not. She's from northern Missouri. She's got a YouTube channel, Beekeeping with Natalie. Um, this was her helping me harvest queen cells and graft, and her parents came down and did some videoing too, so it was pretty cool. This I've outgrown this incubator here, but this is what I typically keep queen cells in. I've got a large cabinet hatcher now. These are in shipping bars with cell protectors, and the queen cells are in it and inside of them. That way, if they start emerging, they're not killing each other. And then you can see in the back right here, these are candy cages that I put them in whenever they emerge. So I said earlier I was obsessed with host resistance, so I started uh, my breeding operation, and I was obsessed over open mating, how it was difficult to control what was going on. So I went and learned. This was in 2014, I believe. I learned from Sue Kobe how to do instrumental insemination, which is really impractical as a whole for most beekeepers. The only way it's useful is if you're really wanting to concentrate certain traits. These are the kids probably involuntarily volunteering to catch drones here. You can see on the entrance, we've tested these colonies so we know how resistant they are as far as VSH scores. And then we'll catch the drones coming back, um, from the singles bar, so to speak. So this is one of my breeder queens here. Here's another one, number 19. These, it seems like it's quite difficult to get them introduced and get them functioning, but if they're done properly and the introduction goes okay, usually they'll last a couple years. Here's another one here, a couple years old. This is a drone cage. You can see a little bit better picture of the entrance includer. That way I can, whenever the drones try to come back from their mating flights, they've pooped already, so they're not all nasty and full of poo. We catch them, and then I'll put them in these little cages that one of my friends made for me. And for a long time, I probably went about it maybe a dumb way, but whenever I was breeding for resistance, I didn't know, no one knew how to measure it or score it per, per se, because no one had released that. And so all I did was just let Mother Nature punch them around and show me which ones were weak. So I was just a VSH hoarder for a while. I couldn't really measure it. And so, you know, I would just, whatever people said was VSH, I would bring it back. I would run it just like you normally would and, uh, and see what happened, basically. And you could tell really quickly that some of the stock was not resistant. They would get chewed up by mites. So a friend notified me that Dr. John Harbaugh was looking for breeding group participants. And he thought that I would be a good fit. So I emailed him and I did get in Dr. Harbaugh's group. And that's what really changed the game for us is I went from not being able to measure it, I'm just letting Mother Nature beat them up to where I could go in and take brood samples and see exactly if they were actually resistant or not and see if they were suppressing mite reproduction. Here's some friends that had come out to help. Hannah, Hannah Price. I think she's from around your area, southwestern Missouri. In the back is Erin Mullins. She was the state fair coordinator for a while, working with Missouri State Beekeepers and was a queen back in the day. Kyle Day, he's a Missouri boy too. He was an ambassador, and I think he's going to be, I think he might be VP or something coming up here for Missouri State. So it was good to have help because this stuff's a little bit tedious whenever you're just pulling, hundreds of brood at a time and seeing if the mites are reproducing or not. So it really helps if you've got friends. And once I could measure it, I already had instrumental insemination, so it was it was pretty easy to just tie those two together. Same, almost the same group. The only different one is Jeff Mayfield in the back, Riverbend Honey. He's around Cape Girardeau. This is Matt Kobe. We've got a couple people that come out of Michigan, James Lee, Matt Kobe, Matt's wife, Megan. They really like to come down and help us gather data. And we've got some really cool data that we captured this fall where we did Harbo, like a VSH assay. We would measure the VSH and then we'd do a mite wash too. And of course, they'd not been treated. And this was like September 1. So, mite levels are getting up there. So it was really cool to see that, how VSH they were and how their mite loads were. So look how calm Matt is here. Well, underneath the table, uh, this was going on. My wife found some kittens behind our bee building down here, and their eyes weren't even open yet. And so I bottle fed them, and that one was the most rotten one there. So here's Jamie and Aaron doing assays. I just used the little Kelly bees used to make them. It's just a grafting frame that holds your frame at a set angle. That way you can really see down in there, and it helps. So we just started using those, and they're not that expensive. Of course, they've probably gone up, but we're an early trial apiary for UBO. Some of you may or may not heard of that. It stands for unhealthy brood odor. So we're measuring. There's another thing that's cool because you can measure it. Still really new. So there's a lot of field trials going on. It's on the market though, so you can purchase it. And this was June 2023 before it was went to market. Whenever they did trials at our place, and it's cool because you can actually measure it. And this is the second test available that actually gives you a measurement instead of just letting Mother Nature shred them and seeing who's left. So this is me and Dr. Wagner, Kara, that invented UBO. And you can see the little circle here where the pupa are uncapped. You can see the pupa in there. That's because the bees smelled that unhealthy brood odor, thought something might be up, and they uncapped it, which is what you want to see. Here's another one, me and Jeff. You can see on that brood frame, that circle there where they've opened up the pupa. So that was cool to see. We had some really good results. Here, a lot of them are chewed. You can see the bees knew something was wrong, opened it up to see what was going on, and then started removing the pupa. So I feel like things are just getting good here. I actually left my day job March 1 to pursue bee breeding full time. And also, really, I think there's people that are making some really good efforts that you're starting to see hit the market now. But historically, there was not a lot of highly resistant bees on the market, definitely not consistently. Even though some were marketed as such, a lot of them didn't cut the mustard. So we're hoping to solve that. We've got some collaborative efforts going forward with commercial producers. Once we've got our tested stock, we're working with some of them to actually have queens on the market, cells, and open mated queens too. So more to come on that. And really, I mean, I'm an entomologist technically, and from an entomologist perspective, there's no, what's that?
No way to say anything.
Okay. From an entomology perspective, really the only long-term solution to this is going to be genetics. We've got some really good miticides on the market, but lately some of the stuff coming out of the USDA Bee Lab is stating that there's a lot of resistance popping up to amitraz, which really sucks because it was a really good miticide for a long time. A lot of people are still using it. So really, we know the only long-term solution is breeding, but it's also the most difficult one too. So this is us at the booth here at the North American Honeybee Expo last year. I don't know if any of you all are planning on going to that this year. We'll be there again. And we'll have a booth too. So if you do go by there, stop and see us. This is my wife and daughter and son here, and just a few things that I can't take any credit for the booth. That was my wife 100%. So I just smile and talk about bees. So a few things that I think is a secret to our success. Really, like you saw with the VSH testing, if that was up to me alone, I would not get near as much data. You know, after queen season and maintaining all the hives, you're about smoked anyway. And whenever we have friends come in to help us gather a lot of data, it's just a huge help and really gives our breeding program an advantage. So if it wasn't for my family helping out, my wife for sure, and friends coming down and helping test, we wouldn't be in as good a position for sure. I think, like a lot of beekeepers, refusing to quit, even if it makes sense. Um, you know, if you can't power through a few bad years or whatever adversity comes your way, you know, it's going to be difficult to achieve success. Mastering queen rearing, I think that flipped uh, my operation from an expensive hobby to actually making some money once I mastered that. It's twofold. So it's a product you could sell, you can actually produce and sell. So you're making more money, but then you're not having to purchase queens too. So it's kind of twofold. You're more self reliant and it's another income stream. So mastering queen rearing was huge, and relentless pursuit of host resistant traits. You know, I knew from early on that there VSH was a thing. It had been documented, you know, ala grooming, like the Purdue mite biters. Like there's a few genetic traits that we can track that do give them an edge. VSH, I think, is the best because it suppresses mite reproduction. So you have resistance, and you've also got disease and viral resistance from that hygienic function. So it's really multifaceted. And I really love bees. Ask my wife; she really gets probably sick of hearing about it. So that's why it's nice to have people like you to talk about bees too. So I don't know if you guys have any questions. If you're interested in checking out what I'm doing or getting on my email list, I usually give a heads up about what we're going to do with queen sales. I mentioned maybe having open mated queens or cells available from partner producers from my tested stock. I'll send all that email out, um, you know, to website subscribers. So that's my website. You can always find us on Facebook. We're on Instagram. I've got Stevens Bee Company on YouTube. I've done some cool interviews on there. This year I didn't put a ton of content on, but I've got some more stuff coming up, some interviews and stuff that you might want to check out if you're interested in what we're up to. Also, my email, if you got questions, if you don't want to ask in front of other people, if something pops up into your mind later on, you can always shoot me an email. I don't, I'm not grant funded or anything. Some people choose to get on Patreon and support us that way. And other people support us from buying queens. So let me stop screen share here. I don't know if you guys have any questions or not, but I definitely would be willing to try to tackle them.
So what part of the year do you sell your queens?
Question is, what part of the year do you sell your queens?
I usually start shipping the first week or so of April. So by mid-April, I start shipping, and usually by mid-June, either mid-June or the first, you know, end of June, I stop. So April, May, June is whenever I've got them available. Now, if some of the partner producers I mentioned with open mated queens and stuff, they're a lot farther south than me. So, you know, I might have some availability through them, but it's brand new. We're still working on you know, how we're gonna handle logistics and everything. So
These are virgin queens, correct? Or are they mated that you're selling?
say that again.
Are these virgin queens you're selling, Corey, or are these mated?
I do sell virgin queens primarily out of my location. The partner producers I mentioned, whenever they come online, it's looking like there'll be probably limited availability this year till we get some stuff ironed out, but those will be open mated. They are open mated at their location, and it's a new agreement, like I mentioned. So they'll be my daughters out of my artificially inseminated breeder queens, but they'll be mated with random drones. So, I don't know how they'll test. We'll just have to see. I would say there's a, reasonable expectation. Most of them should be resistant, but, we're going to do samples and just see how resistant they are. Also, he's setting up, he'll be keeping a lot of them. He'll be setting up drone production yards for next year. That way, they're not just mating with unselected drones. It'll be mating with, VSH drones. So more to come on that.
What was the like overlap with UBO and your Arbo? Or what are the differences? Like
Between UBO and Harbo?
Yeah.
UBO is brand new. It's basically, it measures. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if people have heard of freeze killed brood before, like a general hygiene test where they use liquid nitrogen or whatever, and they freeze a portion of brood. Well, that's like 1960s technology, and it doesn't specifically select for varroa resistance. So, according to Caro's scientific studies, it's more focused on bees that have varroa resistance. And instead of dead brood at 24 hours, it's stressed brood at 2 hours. So, it's a lot more stringent test. Now, UBO compared to Harbo. So the UBO is just you're measuring the bee's response to stress pheromones or unhealthy brood pheromones. And the Harbo test, you go in and you're pulling pupa out right before they hatch, and you're measuring the bee's ability to shut down mite reproduction. So, like if you've got 100% VSH queen, and you get in there even September and October, they'll bring mites home, from robbing other colonies or whatever. But if you dig into the brood, they shut down 100% of mite reproduction. If it starts to get diluted, they may only shut down 50% or less. If it gets too dilute and they can't suppress it at all, then it's basically they're not VSH anymore. So the UBO is just kind of a hygiene test to see how they respond to stress pheromones, and the VSH test is measuring the bee's ability to suppress mite reproduction. And of course, if they're not letting mites reproduce all year long, you can imagine that they're generally speaking, their mite levels are much lower in the fall. A lot of them, like my apiary, even with some foreign queens in it, and the foreign queens, some of them stood out terribly as having a lot higher mite loads. Even factoring that in, my whole apiary without treating it was below a 3% infestation threshold. Some of them were, a bunch of them were zeros or one mite in a wash. That's no treatment for, I've not treated in like 14 years. So, it works. It's not snake oil. The only problem is, like the industry didn't know how to measure it for a long time. And so I think a lot of people just thought VSH sounded cool, or they thought people wanted it and they would just call their bees VSH. And then there were some that had it at one time but didn't select for it, and it muddied out. So I feel like it kind of made some people skeptical about it. But if you've got some really highly selected stuff, you can really tell it in your washes and how your bees survive and how they thrive.
He said he collected the drones, came back. Why is he? Understand?
Corey, could you describe why you're collecting your drones for the artificial insemination?
Yep. So basically, whenever a queen flies off to mate, they'll mate with 15 or 20 different drones. And, there's reports, some people say they fly or can fly multiple miles. Sometimes they don't. There's a lot of variation in it. But either way, I was obsessed over making sure just because I wanted to sell queens and sell breeding stock that mom and dad had that gene set. Instead of it just being random. I always thought of it like if you had a black lab, a prized AKC lab that had all kinds of field trial championships and stuff. If if she came into heat and you just turned her loose in the neighborhood and hope for the best, they may kind of look half beagle or half German Shepherd. You don't know. So if I'm selecting for a very specific trait set, that's the only reason that artificial insemination or instrumental insemination is useful. Otherwise it's not. Like, it's harder to get queens mated, of course, if humans are meddling with it rather than letting nature just do its thing. There's a lot more stuff that can go wrong, but if you're looking for specific trait sets like VSH or whatever it is you're obsessed over, you can really tighten it to where you have a lot higher percent success as far as mating goes. Like, instead of 3 out of 20 drones being VSH, you can make it 100% with some methods, or even if you're just mass collecting, testing, and moving the ones that don't do well out, you can still get it 80, 90%. So it just, again, it's just for trait selection. It's most people, it's not practical, it's not worth the money, and it's not worth the time unless you're really trying to concentrate specific traits, which is not 99.9% of beekeepers.
So he was
But,
selected
you
to
know,
see.
Yes.
Thank you.
So when you breed a queen, is it only one drone that you're using?
When you breed a queen, are you only using one drone for the?
no, you can. It's called a single drone insemination. Like, a lot of scientists use that. Like, if I walked into someone's bees randomly and like 2% of them tested with VSH, you can go in and concentrate that to where it's more uniform. The problem is, it's kind of like inbreeding. Like, you really cut your sex alleles down um, to where the bees aren't as productive. So, like, if you use single drone inseminations, it's just to concentrate something that's at a low frequency in a population, and then you need to get away from it. You need to change your model up. Although a lot of scientists don't, they just keep doing single drone inseminations. But sometimes the stuff that comes out the other end isn't very vigorous and it's kind of lopsided. So what I do is, like, I'll test a whole yard. Typically, if something does not test good, we requeen it and move it to another yard because there is some drifting of drones. But after we've got the riffraff out of the way, um, we'll put those. You remember those little includers that I had on the entrance? Whenever I know the drones are flying, we'll go put those things around and then catch them whenever they come back. So I may catch from 20 or 30 colonies at a time that have been tested, and that tested high. I put them in that cage like you saw, and then I turn them loose in a flight cage so they just mix up, and then I just extract them at random, and then we'll inseminate the queens with that. We call it like a general population mix. It's just, you know, that could have, even by the time you extract it and it all homogenizes a bit from swimming around in there, in theory, instead of mating with just 15 or 20 drones, you could have a queen that's like super mated with, like 100 drones or something crazy. So it just depends on the technique that you use, but that's what we do.
What percent of your queens are artificially inseminated
What,
that you run?
what percent are inseminated?
Yeah, queens you run within your operation.
It depends. Like a couple years ago, I didn't do any insemination. So the following year, I had just a limited number of breeder queens, but they were 2-year-old queens. So, I don't know what we're at now, but I would say it's 10% or less. Sometimes it gets down as low as 5% of our queens that we keep are inseminated because, we'll open mate a mass number of daughters. And that's where I was saying we'll go and test those daughters, and the daughters that are high performing, we catch drones out of those. So I'll graft out of my breeder queens and I catch drones off the high testing daughters. So I don't know. I'd like to get to where, we're running 50 to 100 breeder queens, but man, it's difficult because, even if to end up with 50 to 100, you'd probably have to do 300 inseminations because some of them get introduced well, they look good, and then you'll come back in a couple months and there'll be a daughter queen in there. So supersedure is not uncommon. Even some batches of open mated queens, it's not uncommon. And if you start meddling with them, like insemination, sometimes they want to supersede. So I would say, 5 to 10% of our population is what I've got, currently with tested breeders. And if I sell queens, virgin queens or cells, that I graft exclusively out of those artificially inseminated breeders.
I assume your queens have been kind of shipped all over the country. Are you seeing pretty much similar results from
Yes.
where you sold them?
Oh yeah, definitely. They've gone all over the lower 48 states. I've not shipped any internationally. I don't know if some may have been smuggled. I have no idea, but pretty much just the lower 48. And I can go back and look at analytics, but I think I've shipped to every state in the union. I've got some up by the Canadian border, and then I've got some in Florida, Texas, New Mexico. So, yeah, I mean, I get good feedback. I've got a lot of repeat customers. Um, it's like whenever we first started measuring VSH, it wasn't, I think it was like 2020. So I had higher populations than most average people before that. But man, once we started actually measuring we've been able to get it really tight now. So it just keeps getting better every year. You guys have had some pretty good questions. You got anything else on your mind? Doesn't have to be BSH or
Basic questions, basically, or anything? Doesn't have to be this. They say you had a beautiful family.
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Good genes in the father, I guess.
Very informative.
Yep. Thank you very much, Cory. I'll email you and you can send me your speaking fee and stuff.
Okay.
We'll put this on your Facebook page and then on our club YouTube page for people that missed it.
Sounds
Appreciate you
great.
taking the time.
You're quite welcome. You all have a good evening.
All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.